Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Today at 8 pm, we shall be hosting a live session on our YouTube channel. The topic of discussion would be farm laws and the session would be conducted by Sarmad sir. So don't forget to tune in to our YouTube channel at 8 pm sharp. Now let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at a few editorials and columns. First, we have an editorial on page number 6 and a few related articles on page number 1, 8 and 13 that deal with the inauguration of the new administration in the United States and its impact on the American society and as well as on global geopolitics. Over the last few months, we have discussed in detail the contentious presidential elections of the United States. After a highly polarized election, former President Donald Trump leaves behind a notorious legacy of having divided the American society on racial and religious lines. Then by refusing to concede the elections and by making unsubstantiated allegations of electoral fraud, he has not only weakened the American democracy but has also left behind a bad precedent for democracies around the world. While in power, Donald Trump was also seen to be taking several controversial foreign policy decisions that have not only eroded the leadership role of the United States in global geopolitics, but have also ended up having an impact on Indian interests. So following this volatile period in American politics, the new American administration under President Joe Biden has been sworn in on Inauguration Day, that is on the 20th of Jan. And on the very first day in office, President Biden has signed around 17 executive orders in order to reverse several controversial decisions of the Trump administration, which might provide an opportunity for the deeply divided American society to heal and to restore America's leadership role in global geopolitics. Internally, the United States had been deeply polarized by the partisan politics that was pursued by Donald Trump, which is clearly highlighted by the fact that he chose not to attend the inauguration ceremony, making him only the 4th US president to skip the inauguration ceremony, which marks the peaceful transition of power. According to the editorial, incoming President Joe Biden has made the right beginning, and this was very evident from his speech itself, because it clearly displays the political intent of the new administration to heal the American society and unite the American people to make the country a stronger democracy. The fact that several Republican politicians chose to attend the event highlights the urgency of both the Democrats and the Republicans to heal the American society that has been left deeply polarized. It has been alleged that under the Trump administration, minorities and immigrants felt threatened, but the swearing in of Kamala Harris as the vice president, who is of Indian and African descent, sends out a strong symbolic gesture and a message of support to the minority and immigrant communities in the United States. The editorial reviews the 17 executive orders that were signed by Joe Biden, and it states that the healing process has already begun. For example, President Trump had approved a controversial policy to ban immigrants from several Muslim majority nations. Then, in line with his conservative immigration policies, he had approved the construction of a border wall on the US-Mexico border, which in turn led to the alienation and targeting of several immigrant groups in the country. A few other controversial immigration policies had led to the deportation of several individuals and even to the separation of children from their parents. Then under the Trump administration, non-citizens of the country had been excluded from the census, and even with regard to control of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Trump administration had appeared to be non-serious, and it had even failed to mandatorily enforce the wearing of masks. Then the biggest threat of Trump's policies was the polarization of the American society on racial and religious lines. This had directly contributed to the rise in far-right extremism, including the revival of white supremacist groups such as Proud Boys, and the rise of neo-Nazi sympathizers and conspiracy theories such as QAnon. The threat posed by far right-wing extremism in the US was clearly on display during the latest insurrection attempt at the US Capitol, and hence the Biden administration will have to keep in mind this threat to American democracy and will have to take the right steps to heal the American society to bridge these racial and religious divisions that have been created through polarization. Then even with regard to foreign policy, Donald Trump was seen to be unpredictable, conservative and inward looking. And this had led the Trump administration to unilaterally quit the Paris Agreement of the Climate Change Convention and even to exit the World Health Organization and cut funding to the WHO. Apart from this, Donald Trump had pulled out the US from several multilateral institutions such as UNESCO, the UN Human Rights Council, and the US even quit the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement and was seen to be consistently taking a stand against the World Trade Organization, which was a reflection of Trump's lack of faith in multilateralism and was seen as an attempt to push unilateral trade deals, which was seen as a threat to international cooperation and multilateralism, which is the need of the hour in a globalized world. But the incoming Biden administration, on the very first day in office, has reversed several of these controversial decisions of the Trump administration, and this is going to have a significant impact on global geopolitics and as well as on Indian interests. Joe Biden has signed an executive order to bring the US back under the Paris Agreement, and the US would be back under the deal on climate change by the 19th of Feb. This was a much needed initiative to show that the United States was serious about climate action, because currently the Paris Agreement is the only international agreement that we have which is collectively focused on tackling climate change and global warming. Because the earlier Kyoto Protocol of the Climate Change Convention had been rejected by the United States as a result of the conflict between the developed countries and the developing countries that was seen at the Climate Change Convention. Under the Kyoto Protocol, the US had earlier refused to take up binding targets and it had chosen to stay out of the agreement. But the Paris Agreement provided for a more balanced approach by seeking to balance the interests of the developed world and the developing world, and instead of imposing binding targets to the countries, it provided for voluntary targets, which are also known as INDCs or the Intended Nationally Determined Contributions. So the voluntary target approach of the Paris Agreement provides the best solution to us to deal with climate change and global warming, and responsible powers like India are already well on their way to achieve their voluntary targets. Even several European countries and large emitters such as China, they have abided by the voluntary targets of the Paris Agreement, and hence the world cannot afford a situation where one of the top emitters of the world, that is the US, stays out of such an agreement, because the Paris Agreement also allows the developed countries to be held accountable for their historical emissions. The developed countries that are largely responsible for historical emissions are expected to announce larger voluntary targets as compared to developing countries like India and China. So if we have to avoid the catastrophic consequences of climate change and global warming and reduce global temperatures by the end of this century, then top emitters which are responsible for historical emissions such as US, they have to be a part of these climate action efforts, and hence the decision of the Biden administration to bring the US back under the Paris Agreement is a welcome and much needed step. Then another controversial policy of the Trump administration was to first deny the reality of the pandemic and then blame the breakout on China and on the inefficiencies of the World Health Organization. As the pandemic started to spread wildly within the United States, the Trump administration refused to take any responsibility and pinned the blame on WHO and its failure. On this basis, Donald Trump ordered the withdrawal of the United States from WHO, and he even put an end to US funding of the WHO, which happens to be one of the topmost contributors. While the WHO definitely has certain inefficiencies, blaming the WHO entirely was uncalled for, and at a time when a global leader like the US was expected to display leadership and promote international cooperation through WHO, the Trump administration chose to quit the WHO and cut funding to the organization, thereby hampering global efforts through the WHO to contain the pandemic. Now, President Biden has immediately dismantled these policies of Trump, and he has signed an executive order to bring the US back to the WHO. Now let's take up another editorial from page number 6 that deals with the topic of data protection, data localization and data privacy. This editorial has been published in the context of the latest privacy policy that was brought out by WhatsApp. Recently, WhatsApp introduced a controversial privacy policy which would allow the transfer of its user data to its parent organization, Facebook Inc. And accepting this new policy was made mandatory for its users. Now, this triggered a huge outrage amongst its users around the world, and especially in India, where WhatsApp has its largest subscriber base, which stands at around 459 million users, immediately felt threatened that their data privacy was being compromised for commercial gains by seeking to share and transfer the user data to the parent organization. This led a number of Indian users to quit WhatsApp and shift to other alternatives which provide for stronger data privacy such as Signal, Telegram, etc. Now, this was a legitimate concern that was being expressed by several Indian users because the parent organization Facebook Inc. owns three social media giants. This includes its social media platform Facebook, the messaging service WhatsApp, and Instagram. All the three products of Facebook Inc. are widely popular in India, and this has allowed Facebook Inc. to harvest massive quantities of Indian user data, which in turn could be monetized by these companies by opening up the user data to advertisers who are looking to deliver targeted ads through the smart algorithms of Facebook. Such provisions for monetization of user data already exist on Facebook and Instagram, and WhatsApp, which until now was a free messaging service, could be used by Facebook Inc. to harvest more user data and integrate them to provide for targeted delivery of ads and push business for the advertisers by making use of the payment service on WhatsApp. Now, these concerns become even more serious considering the fact that large private corporations such as Facebook are looking to exploit user data, which not only results in the breach of data privacy of the user, but it has already been well established that such sensitive user data could be exploited by several third parties as well to alter consumer behavior and choices, and even carry out social engineering through which a consumer could be forced to change his choice, or maybe a voter could be encouraged to change his political opinions. And through such social engineering, it's even possible to trigger riots, extremism, and even uprisings. See, currently the world has entered the fourth stage of the Industrial Revolution, which is driven by emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, deep learning neural networks, IoT or Internet of Things, 5G communication, etc. And the building block for these emerging technologies that are driving the fourth stage of the Industrial Revolution is data, that is data generated by the users. So it's no wonder that data is often referred to as the new gold or the new oil. So considering how critical data is in today's world, private corporations, governments, and even non-state actors are looking to gain control over data. Their intent would be to exploit the data for their own self-interests, and such exploitation of user data poses a direct threat to the data privacy of the individual. Now, a company like Facebook would never dare come out with such privacy policies in Europe, because in the Europe region, the European Union has come out with the General Data Protection Regulation, which places very strict conditions and regulations on private corporations with regard to collection, storage, and transfer of user data. Now, this shows how private corporations like Facebook adopt a regionally differential treatment when it comes to data protection and data privacy. This new privacy policy, which was specifically made applicable to Indian users, would have enabled Facebook Inc. to integrate the user data across all its three products, and it would have essentially led to the establishment of a data monopoly. Now, companies like Facebook are able to provide for differential treatment on the basis of region because in India, we do not have strong data protection laws like the European Union. The GDPR of the EU is said to be a model regulation through which the privacy and the rights of the user has been protected, and it severely restricts the manner in which these companies can collect, store, and transfer user data. Unfortunately, such a stringent data protection law is currently missing in India, and this massive shift of Indian users from WhatsApp towards Signal and Telegram made the Indian government wake up and realize the regionally differential treatment that was being offered by such private corporations. In this backdrop, India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has even sent a few queries to Facebook and has even issued a notice questioning why WhatsApp and Facebook are not protecting the data privacy and the data security of Indian users. The blame for this failure to respect the data privacy of Indian users should rest not just with these private corporations but also with the Indian government. Because the government has failed to bring in a data protection law and it has failed to include the recommendations of the BN Sri Krishna Committee. Because just like these private corporations and any other government around the world, the Indian government is also looking to control the data of the Indian users in order to further step up the surveillance and monitoring of Indian data by the state agencies. See, the government of India had constituted the BN Sri Krishna Committee in 2017, and the committee was given the mandate to provide for recommendations to come out with a data protection law that could protect the data privacy of the citizens. Accordingly, the Sri Krishna Committee came out with a set of recommendations in 2018, and some of these provisions have been included by the government, and it has tabled the Data Protection Bill of 2019. Currently, this Data Protection Bill is stuck in the Parliament because it has been strongly opposed by several opposition parties, and currently the provisions of the bill are being reviewed by a parliamentary committee. However, the criticism against the government is that this data protection bill that has been tabled in the Parliament has diluted the provisions and the recommendations that were provided by the Sri Krishna Committee. See, the Sri Krishna Committee had drafted the recommendations by keeping in mind the landmark judgment of the Supreme Court in the Puttaswamy case. In this historic case, the Supreme Court had ruled that right to privacy is a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. So by keeping this in mind, the Sri Krishna Committee tried to strike a balance between data protection, data privacy, and the need for protecting the country's national security. So accordingly, the Sri Krishna Committee provided for the definition of data principals and data fiduciaries. Data principals are none other than the users whose data is being captured and harvested. And data fiduciaries are the institutions which are collecting the user data, processing them, storing and transferring them. And this includes both private corporations and government agencies. So in the interest of providing for data protection and for upholding the data privacy of the users, the Sri Krishna Committee had recommended that the data protection law should accord a set of rights to the users, that is the data principals. And at the same time, to protect these rights of the data principals, the data fiduciaries should be placed under a few obligations and restrictions. In line with this thinking, the Sri Krishna Committee recommended several rights to data principals, such as the right to consent, the right to be forgotten, etc. As per right to consent, data fiduciaries cannot collect, share or transfer user data, that is the data of the data principals, without obtaining their prior consent. As per right to be forgotten, the users, that is the data principals, could demand the data fiduciaries to delete all the data on them at any point of time when they choose to opt out of the services. But the committee also provided for few exceptions with regard to government services and few government agencies and institutions. And in order to ensure that the data fiduciaries protect the rights of the data principals, it even proposed the establishment of a national level data protection authority. Then the biggest question with regard to data protection has always been the question of data localization. See, the problem with most of the private corporations is that they store and hold Indian user data on servers that are located in foreign countries. Be it private corporations such as Facebook, Google or Apple, etc. They all collect massive quantities of Indian user data, and all the data, including sensitive personal data, is stored in servers that are located in foreign territory, and this raises the question of jurisdiction. See, for private corporations, setting up data centers in foreign countries is much more economical because for them, the operational cost is going to increase if they have to provide for local data centers in each and every country, and if they have to set up local data centers or local servers in hot tropical countries such as India because of the massive cooling requirements of such data centers. Along with this, private corporations have an incentive to protect user data from any possible state surveillance because it is on this promise that their users stay committed to their products and services. Hence, many private corporations, they prefer to set up their data centers in several European countries where there are strong regulations against the misuse of data and surveillance. But this preference of private companies to set up data centers in foreign territory creates jurisdictional problems for Indian agencies, and as a result, they are not able to deal with crime and security threats that emanate from the online domain. In this context, countries like India have demanded that private corporations should go in for data localization and set up local data centers which fall under the jurisdiction of Indian law and the Indian authorities. Now, this is quite ironic because the Western private corporations and the government, they are both involved in a conflict and both are seeking to control data and keep it under their jurisdiction in the name of protecting the data privacy of the users. Governments such as the Indian government argues that there is a need to prevent the exploitation of Indian user data by private corporations, particularly Western private corporations. The same argument is made by the other side, and these private entities, they say that there is a need to protect the user data and data privacy from any possible surveillance by the government agencies. So this conflict has led the Indian government to dilute several provisions in the data protection bill that has been tabled in the parliament. And in a departure from the recommendations of the Sri Krishna Committee, the government has excessively focused on data localization alone to guarantee the data privacy and the security for the citizens. The bill brought in by the government limits data localization only to sensitive personal data, and it doesn't cover the entire spectrum of personal data and non-personal data. This excessive focus of the government on data localization could be explained by its need to control the data of the Indian citizens, possibly for surveillance and monitoring. On the other hand, private corporations have been arguing against data localization as it increases their cost of operation and it also places the data of its users under possible state surveillance. So in this ongoing conflict between the government and the private corporations, the rights and the privacy of the data principles is getting compromised, and hence the editorial is of the opinion that the government's approach alone cannot guarantee data protection and data privacy in the country, because through the data protection bill, the government is excessively focused only on data localization, which will help in bringing the Indian data under the jurisdiction of Indian law and Indian authorities. So in its rush to exercise jurisdiction over Indian data, the government has forgotten the possible routes through which private corporations could exploit the Indian data, and hence the editorial states that data localization is not the only solution for protecting data privacy and data security. And for this, India will have to borrow lessons from the European Union's GDPR regulations and provide for strong contracts between the users and the private corporations, which clearly define the obligations, rights and restrictions. And this alone could guarantee the data security of the citizens and possibly prevent the exploitation of their data from both the private entities and government organizations. Now let's take a few articles that provide us with important updates from a mains perspective. We have this article on page number 9, according to which China has defended its construction activities and its establishment of a new village in the border areas in territory that has been claimed by India as a part of Arunachal Pradesh. Just a few days ago, we had discussed that India's Ministry of External Affairs has for the first time acknowledged that this area is a part of Indian territory, but it has been controlled by the Chinese side since 1959, when the Chinese PLA overthrew a post of the Assam Rifles. But China has rejected these claims of India, and it has reiterated that this part of the territory has always been a part of Chinese territory. And this goes on to show that China doesn't recognize Arunachal Pradesh as an integral part of India, and it often refers to Arunachal Pradesh as the so-called Arunachal Pradesh of India, and instead it refers to the region as South Tibet, which essentially means that China sees the Arunachal Pradesh region as an extension of Tibet. This also reiterates China's position that it doesn't recognize the validity of the McMahon Line, which was worked out during the Shimla Convention of 1914 between the British and the then Tibet Kingdom as the de facto border between then British India and Tibet. But the PRC, the People's Republic of China, which was established much later in 1949, has always rejected the Shimla Convention and the validity of the McMahon Line by stating that it was never a party to the convention, and hence it has insisted that India should renegotiate the borders. And since the 1950s, it has went on to claim the whole of Arunachal for itself by referring to the region as South Tibet. This also highlights a Chinese strategy of enhancing and strengthening its claims in the border areas by building such border villages, and it has been reported that China even tries to populate these villages deliberately by asking people from the nearby areas to shift to the new villages, or in some cases even by forcing them to shift to these new villages, so that this enhances the Chinese civilian presence in the border areas, especially in disputed areas, thereby further asserting and strengthening China's claims over these disputed territories. A similar strategy of China was recently observed with regard to its border dispute with Bhutan as well. At a location known as Pangda, China built a village and it tried to populate the village as well near the disputed Doklam site, which is a standing border dispute between China and Bhutan. Next, on page number 10, we have an article which refers to India's vaccine diplomacy. Just the other day we had discussed India's mission known as Vaccine Maitri to provide free vaccine supplies for COVID-19 to several neighboring countries in South Asia and the Indian Ocean region. Under this mission, India has already supplied vaccines to friendly neighboring countries such as Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Maldives, and it is also looking to send out these supplies to Seychelles, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and a few other countries. As an extension of this mission, India has already cleared the export of these vaccines that are manufactured in India to Brazil as well. Next, on page number 14, we have an article that refers to a study that has been brought out by one of the deputy governors of RBI. In this report, the deputy governor of RBI points out that India is headed towards a V-shaped recovery, and the losses that India has suffered as a result of the pandemic and the lockdown could very well be reversed because of the vaccination campaign that India has begun. He says that the ongoing vaccination campaign has the potential to end the pandemic and lockdown restrictions and unlock the economy completely, leading India towards a V-shaped GDP recovery. Now let's take up an article that is relevant for prelims. On page number 1, we have an article that is related to the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case and the possibility of granting the convicts a reprieve or a remission by the governor of the state of Tamil Nadu as per the provisions of Article 161 of the Indian Constitution. See, Article 161 of the Constitution deals with the power of the governor, that is the state's governor, to grant pardons and to suspend, remit or commute sentences in certain cases. The article reads that the governor of a state shall have the powers to grant pardons, reprieves, respites and remission of punishment, or to suspend, remit or commute the sentence of any person convicted of any offence against any law relating to a matter to which the executive power of the state extends. So under these powers of Article 161, the governor of a state can pardon the convicts and exempt them from both their sentence and the conviction, and completely absolve their sentences, punishments and disqualifications. But however, the governor of a state cannot pardon a death sentence, and he cannot pardon the punishment delivered by court-martial. Then under respite, the governor enjoys the pardoning power to award a lesser sentence in place of the higher sentence that was originally awarded to the convict by the courts. This power is exercised by the governor usually when the convict suffers from a physical disability or if the convict is pregnant. Then under reprieve, the governor of a state can choose to stay the execution of a sentence, including that of a death sentence for a temporary period. Then under remit, the governor can choose to reduce the period of the sentence without changing the character of the sentence. For example, if a convict has been sentenced for 2 years of rigorous imprisonment, then this sentence can be remitted to just 1 year of rigorous imprisonment. Then through commute, a punishment of lesser severity and a punishment of a different character can also be given, but unlike pardon, it doesn't absolve the convict of his crime. Now under Article 161, these powers have been given to the governor of a state, and under Article 72 of the Constitution, the President of India also enjoys the similar powers, along with the power to pardon a death sentence and as well as with the power to pardon the punishment granted through a military tribunal. These differences between the powers of the president and the powers of the governor under Article 72 and 161 have been clearly highlighted in this table over here. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, elaborate the impact of changes in US foreign policy under the new Biden administration. The second question, data localization is not the only approach towards protecting data privacy. Elucidate. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.